So, are you gonna start the episode?
I did.
Just, just push the green button. It's not that hard.
No.
Just, Brayden, push the green button and we can start the episode.
I already did.
Then why isn't the episode starting?
I pushed it 3 times.
You just have to push the green button. We can start the episode.
There. What more do you want from me?
I don't see why you guys have so much trouble with the green button.
You know what? I don't want to hear it.
Oh, welcome everyone. So now that the green button is pushed, I'm your corrupt overlord Shane.
And I'm your much better host, Braden Gardner.
And we are conflicted to bring you this next episode of Unqualified Experts. So the last year has been, let's call it a green button level dumpster fire. And so a lot of us had to go digital to get our board game addiction fixed. So it was a challenge, but good news, there were actually a lot of good digital board games out there.
Begrudgingly, I have to agree. We actually had to switch from our in-person board game nights to digital board game nights over the course of much of 2020 and the first half of 2021, and actually, there were a lot of surprisingly good digital board game adaptations that we were forced to discover as a result of this change.
Yeah, and while it's never quite the same as being able to be there in person with your best buds, and, boy, what would we call each other? Not mortal enemies, but favorite combatants.
I was going to go with tolerated acquaintances, but you do.
Fair enough. But sometimes, you just can't meet in person. You can't have that energy. Hopefully it's usually not because of a pandemic, but the good news is we found a lot of games, and a lot of them really hit the mark. And a couple really missed.
Not wrong. But we're going to start today by talking about some of the games that we really felt hit the mark as far as digital board game adaptations. This is not intended to be a comprehensive list. This is just our first round picks, if you will, for what we would choose as games to go to if you needed to play a digital board game.
Yeah, and while there's a big library behind Tabletop Simulator or things like that, we were going for the games that you can buy and play without knowing the system, without knowing programming, without having to pick anything up. This is just, if you purchase it on Steam or on iOS or on Switch, you can just buy it and go.
Correct, and we're also going to be omitting environments like Board Game Arena because they kind of deserve their own separate category. They're great. We really enjoy what they bring to the table.
They will actually be the topic of our next episode even. But for here, we want to get you the ones where you can end this episode, go to Steam, and be playing in 5 minutes.
Exactly.
And so first one, Braden, I know is one of your favorites, so I'll let you kick it off then.
Sure. So one of the games that we really found took to a digital adaptation really well is Ticket to Ride. And the user interface for it is very clean. It's pretty easy to understand. There's no green buttons that you really have to worry about, which is nice. The gameplay is very smooth and true to the actual board game experience, having played both the actual version on the wall behind us as well as the digital version, with the side benefit that there's no risk of someone bumping the table and knocking over all the trains.
Which I believe we did on stream at one time.
This has happened both on our Thursday stream, and I'm pretty sure it also happened on Table for Two.
Yeah,
So this is a proud tradition that we uphold when Ticket to Ride hits the table.
Yeah, and I agree. It's a faithful imitation. They add little details that are really nice digitally. The sound of a train when you hook up a line. The way they show you the length of each route you complete, they show you city to city what you have to do. It's just a really good interface. It gives just a little bit extra beyond the board game, which you kind of want in a digital version, without making things messy and without betraying the true gameplay. And so while Ticket to Ride, I enjoy the game, I'm not good at it. It is one where I just accept I'm getting my butt whooped ahead of time. But they do such a nice job making it a fun experience, and the server is really solid. And this will come up a lot as a point, because a lot of really otherwise good digital board games, their multiplayer servers are trash. This was not the case with Ticket to Ride. It can be a little bit confusing the first time you try to set up a multiplayer game, but once you figure out how you do it, their servers have never given us an issue. And that's a big thumbs up in my book.
I agree. Easy setup is one of the things that I really have come to value in a digital board game.
And since we're talking about servers ruining a digital board game, we are going to segue into what otherwise would have been my number one choice in this list. So, Splendor. Gonna start off with the positives. One, great game. I think we both agree we love that board game. It has a really solid computer AI. So if your friends aren't available to play, you can actually set up AI that has different strategies, and the computer players are actually challenging. If you set them up on hard mode and don't pay attention for even a turn or two, they will run you over without apology. And they don't do it through, change RNG or anything like that. They just legitimately play well, which is a really refreshing change.
It's also a relief because, segueing into the server downsides real quick, and there will be other things that we cover on the benefits as well, but it's real easy to run out of time on your turn.
Yeah.
Even before the little hourglass or countdown timer runs out. Like, you'll think you still have some extra time to go, and you don't.
Because the lag.
So, having AI that aren't just complete boneheads is actually a very, very significant positive that helps offset this really, really obnoxious negative.
Because it's playable when your friends aren't there. The background music, absolutely beautiful. Fits in with the Renaissance era. It's actually some of my favorite background music I've had from any online game. It's just a great compact board. The interface works smoothly. You get the information you need without getting confused. And it just comes together really well. Like, you get the Splendor experience playing it. But oh my god, those stupid servers. We have been disconnected so many times. We have run out of time. A player's had lag where I can't move for some reason. Then their turn runs out, then they get booted. It's just... it sucks, because it would easily be probably our number one choice if the servers were even remotely solid, but they're just not.
Agreed. I mean, beyond that, the user interface is fairly intuitive. You can dig in for some extra details pretty easily. So you're not really losing out on anything from the board game, which, again, is the hallmark of a good digital adaptation, while it also cleans up some of the management of in-game elements really well.
Yeah, and it's one of those games where it almost works better online, in my opinion, because instead of having to look over and see how many cards does Braden have and how many cards does Callahan have, I can just look at the interface and I have all the information right there. And so it's a nice plus, but yeah, those servers, it's such a drag. It's like the A+ paper that gets dragged down to a C, because that one thing was so bad.
Mm-hmm.
But moving on to happier things, Small World. This is one of those games where I like it a lot. I don't love it. Brandon, I think you're kind of indifferent, or you just kind of mild-like.
I'm largely indifferent to Small World. Like, it's a well-designed board game. Mm-hmm. There's a reason it's a classic and a gateway board game for those who are stepping up from the Monopolies and Unos of the world. Mm-hmm. But it's not anything that I'm particularly attached to one way or the other.
The digital version, they actually do a very, very nice job of putting an online version. The layout is smooth. The coloration is really well done. I love the way they fade stuff to gray. So for people who are colorblind like me, I can tell at a glance what's active, what's not, which is a huge, huge help. showing the individual points adding up at the end of each turn, I think is an awesome, awesome way to set up, because not only does it explain to each player why you got the points you got, but for your competition, they see the bonuses you're getting and get to adjust their strategies accordingly.
It also teaches us just how bad every single one of us is at in-game math.
Very, very terrible. It also taught us that forest tridents are freaking deadly, and you cannot let anyone run away with them.
Yeah, forest tridents are just...
Oof.
We don't do that here.
Well, I do. That's how I won both times. But
you shouldn't be allowed.
But Small World, if you love the game in real life, the digital version, super smooth. Once again, a good example of a server that did not give us issues, unlike some of the other games on this list. And when you're talking about playing online, that has to be a major consideration. And so they get a thumbs up for me. Which brings us to one of my favorites and most conflicted games on this list.
Lords of Waterdeep.
AKA home of the green button.
Fuck that button. I hate it. It's the worst part of that game. Not close. Not even going to pretend otherwise. Fuck that stupid button. I've already hit it to complete my move. Oh, I have to hit it again now to end my turn, even though there's literally no in-game action I can take between finishing my move and ending my turn. Why?
Yeah. So
Why?
Well, I'll go with some of the positives before we go revisit this topic. The game board does look beautiful. The art of it. I love the fact that they blend the expansions in so seamlessly when you're playing online, so it just seems like it was all one board to begin with. And obviously, I enjoy the fact that I don't have to set up for 45 minutes to get a single game going. On the graphics side, if you pay attention to the details, you'll see stuff like the little illustrated ships actually float along the water in and out of the harbor. You'll occasionally hear the sound of seagulls if you have the sound on. It's just this attention to very little details is actually really, really well done. And, once we figured out the invite system, which is more complicated than it really needs to be, their servers have been pretty solid.
And once you also have the ability to figure out how to turn up the allowed time for each player, do that.
Because the initial setting is way too low.
I think it's something like you have 15 minutes to take your turns throughout the course of the entire game. And Lords of Waterdeep is a very involved worker placement. There's a lot to consider on a given turn. 15 minutes is just not enough time.
Yeah, even if you'd like to be reckless and shoot from the hip a lot like I do, 15 minutes wasn't even close to being enough time. And if that's not enough time for me, it's not enough time for general strategy thinkers or for the people who your chaotic play style has completely disrupted. And so that's a legit one. The green button, I laugh about it all the time because it was never an issue with me individually, but since Phil, Braden, and Callahan all hate it, the evidence is there. Apparently the green button is a big problem. It is a massive annoyance. Sometimes in the right or wrong circumstances, you have to click it 3 times at the end of the turn to go to the next turn. And here is a huge one for me. I love that game. I'd like to play it solo a lot. The computer AI is garbage. It's just garbage. There's no other way to put it. They love the quests that are stupid and that almost guarantee you a loss if you keep going for them. They ignore their bonuses. They do moves that just make no strategic sense on any level, any way, shape, or form. It's just really, really terrible AI. No matter what setting you put the AI players at. And game-breakingly so. If you're a moderately good player, you should win 19 out of 20 games. Easy. And that's a shame, because there's no reason for it to be as absolute terrible as it is. And consistently, it'll sprint and break its game to go for some of the worst quests in the game, and completely and utterly ignore the strongest quests in the game.
Which, if you want some heads-up tips on what those look like, check out the link in the description below. We've got an awesome blog post that outlines all of that information.
The AI would have been so much smarter if they just programmed that in. But yeah, it's one of those where it really cuts down on the enjoyment for single player. And for that reason, it's just so bad we had to knock it down the list.
Agreed. So, speaking of games that I wish I could kick further down the list, but I recognize my opinion is not the popular one here. Let's talk a little bit about the digital adaptation of Root. First, they do a really good job of outlining different sections of the board while making it look kind of like a classic RPG video game.
Yeah.
Like, the way that they translated it from the board game behind us to the actual digital environment is very well done.
They did a very nice job with that. It really, you almost don't feel like you're playing a board game about half the time. And yet you have the cards playing, you recognize it as Root. And they do a really nice job with the graphics on the card, the little minor in-game details that really kind of make it pop to life. A little crackling of the fire. Or the singing of the birds before the avians come to wipe out your empire. You know, the things that make Root Root.
Go Team Eagles!
It's a very smooth playing experience, at least as much as you're going to get with a game like Root. And I like the fact that if you're not quite sure what's going on, you can move your mouse around and a little parchment will come up explaining what each section is, what the cards are. So if you feel a little bit lost, in-game it actually does help you to get back on track, which I wish more digitized board games actually did. And the AI is brutal, and I mean that in a good way. It is very solid AI that is looking to beat the crap out of you unmercifully. And it's like playing a really good Root player.
Which, not a bad thing. Generally speaking, my primary complaints with Root are all going to stem back to a game balance perspective, but that's not a good reason to crap all over the digital version. They did a good job translating it. The problem was that, in my opinion, the source material needed a little tuning.
Yeah, and that's kind of how the game works. Like, if you like Root, you will really like the digitized version. They did a very nice job with it. And credit where credit's due. There are a lot of board games that do not make a good digitized version, but Root actually does. Which brings us to Sagrada, which Phil introduced us to both in real life and the online version.
The online version was actually my first experience playing the game, and I gotta say, they did a really good job.
Yeah.
I've got the actual board game version, we just hadn't had a chance to get into it. But the digital version's very, very smooth. I was pleasantly surprised. It's very easy to keep track of your board or other people's boards.
Yeah.
The controls are intuitive and smooth. The graphics look good. And the setup is one of the easiest experiences I think we've ever had on stream.
Yeah, it's like the invites went out, everybody got them, everybody was in the game, the server ran smoothly. There were no hiccups at all. And almost with every other board game, at least the first time, there was a learning curve. And with this, it just worked the way you wanted it to. Which is to say, and for me, the huge one was Sagrada. Their colorblind mode is fantastic, because those yellows and greens and purples and blues can be a bit hazy for me. But they did something that is pure common sense. They added patterns in the back. So if you click on colorblind mode, oh, the purples have vertical lines and the blues have a bunch of dots. So that way, even if you can't tell the difference in colors, it's very, very easy to tell the different dice apart. And I don't get why more board games don't do this, because not all of us can see all the colors of the rainbow.
Honestly, given the types of board games that do make it to digital versions, it should just be mandatory that a colorblind mode is designed. That's our free tip to you board game developers. Come up with a colorblind mode, for the love of God.
Because especially, and a few other people who are colorblind I've talked to have generally experienced the same thing, the digital colors that are similar are even harder for us to tell apart than the ones that are non-digital. Which makes some board games and some video games, looking at you Tropico 6, unplayable. So having that very distinctive pattern in the background meant, even though to me it looked like we had 3 colors instead of 5, it was a completely playable game. It was very enjoyable and was not lost at any given point. And that is so refreshing considering how many other games I'm just kind of guessing.
So, we've covered our first picks for games that we feel make the cut as far as digital conversion. They're all very good at what they do,
Yep.
and despite the flaws that we did spend some time on, they're not deal breakers.
Yeah.
They aren't taking away enough from the digital experience to say this is a bad adaptation. However, there are a couple that we've found that really just don't quite make the cut that we do also want to spotlight in this episode. So, let's go to the one that I know Shane's not a big fan of in real life anyway.
I should like the game so much, and it just doesn't work for me.
And that's Scythe. Mm-hmm. And I will start by saying I adore Scythe. I think it's an excellent game. There's a lot of strategic value in it. There's so much to keep track of that allows you to go in any number of different directions strategically, depending on your faction and position on the board at any given time. Though I will comment that the game does play better if you're capping out at 6 players versus playing with 4 or fewer. It's one of those things that just ensures better balance and keeps the players who have extra space at the start of the game from running away with it. However, this complication's a bit of a double-edged sword. Scythe is almost too complicated. There's so much to keep track of, and a digital version should be able to make managing all of the bits and bobs super easy. And to an extent, this does. But it's the to an extent bit that really just kind of rankles. Like, I feel like there's more that could have been done to smooth things over.
Well, good example from our previous one on the list. If you put your cursor on all the many different tabs at the bottom, no information pops up. So you had better know the game inside and out to know what each of those are telling you. Why don't you have a parchment pop up like root tab? So, okay, I don't know what this square is versus this rectangle. You put the cursor on, a little parchment comes up, explains to you what you need or what that resource is. That would be a quick way you can make the game just a little bit friendlier to those of us who have limited experience with it. Because I do feel like it's one of those where, to some degree, it might be a very good rendition of the complicated game, but the digital version doesn't do anything to make it more accessible or clarify. And it's one of the few where I'd suggest that maybe the digital version could be considered more confusing, because at least with the board game, you can sit there reading the rule book as you figure things out.
That's fair.
Whereas none of that was put in for Scythe for beginning or just moderately experienced players.
Honestly, the primary area that they did simplify was the scoreboard and the your place to keep track of your actions. But like Shane said, there was more that could have been done to ensure that everything was easier to understand as the game progressed, so that you could check on clarifications or just refresh your memory if it was something you hadn't done yet that game. That said, it's still a good enough adaptation that if you wanted to set up a game that everyone is casually playing over the course of a month, or if it's a game where you just can't get together in person and set up the board game, it's still adequate, but it's not as good as it could have been. It was a missed opportunity.
Yeah, it's kind of like a love letter to the fans. If you're already a diehard, there's not enough wrong to not buy the game. But if you're not a thorough diehard, I just wouldn't recommend it. And that's kind of the fairest review I can give it, to be honest.
Yeah.
And then, oh boy. Baton Universe.
Where to even start?
The rip-off gold buying system to open up the expansions and multiplayer?
Yeah, and I have no idea why that ended up causing the issues it did for you that it did some of the rest of us, but when we were getting ready to stream this game for the very first time, First, we tried the free trial, which said that you could play up to 4 people and you could invite people and it wasn't a problem.
It didn't work.
All lies.
Yeah.
So we begrudgingly all spent the money and complained about the trial not working. And then we couldn't get Shane in. He couldn't buy the actual game. So he ended up having to spend $10 instead of $5 to get the base Catan game. So we got him through that. And then we tried getting everyone into the lobby. And good lord, that was an exercise in the beginning.
Yeah.
On subsequent playthroughs, that has gotten better. I will acknowledge that they have actually taken steps to improve that process. But for as long as it had been out prior to us getting it,
there's no excuse.
That was
that
inexcusable.
Yeah. The trade screen, they improved it, and I'll say it's still bad. It's still really bad. It was absolute utter garbage before the improvement. And even now, more than once, we've said, stop, that's not the trade I want, because you flipped it. Like, if you wanted to give away a stone for a wheat, you end up giving away your wheat for a stone. The fact that that's so easy a mistake to make with the trade interface, and it's... if you're trying to trade with a bank, you never get it right the first time. You always have to reset it, click on the bank again, and then get your harbors or whatever. The trade screen is still garbage, in my opinion. It is better than it was, but I think it just went from massive garbage to minor garbage. It's not a good interface. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It's counterintuitive in almost every way they set things up.
Right. I mean, compare it to Scythe for a moment. Scythe's system is unforgiving, but if you know the game, you're
logical.
not going to screw it up.
Yeah.
Trading is such an integral part to Settlers of Catan that having the interface for it be what I would consider the single worst element of that game is just not acceptable.
Yeah. I will say, and then sometimes you just want to play Settlers. The individual AI when you try playing it solo.
Oh, geez, I forgot about them. Yeah.
Infuriating doesn't even begin to describe it. They are stupid. They will throw the game to make sure a computer player wins. The RNG is clearly adjusted. I had a game where 6 2s were rolled in a row to give the AI a victory over me. Like 2, 2, 2, 2, 2 all the way around. It's like
that's not how statistics works.
Yeah. I don't care that somewhere in the universe that had to happen once. There is no way you're convincing me, oh, that was just the random RNG. It's like, no, because that consistently happens where the computer AI with 4 then becomes 9. Then the other computer AI is traded all it needs for 10. Wow. Yeah, it's infuriating, it's bad, it's lazy AI is what it is. It's taking all the shortcuts to make it hard without actually giving you a game. It's giving you we're changing the rules to beat you down type system. And playing Baton Universe solo is the quickest way to uninstall it and launch your laptop across the room. It's worse than Battle Brothers, in my opinion, for the RNG. And there's a whole Reddit thread of memes on Battle Brothers RNG. So, yeah.
It's ridiculous.
I mean, if you have 4 players and you have the multiplayer and you figure out the server, we've had some good games on it. It was a nice way to play Catan when we couldn't see each other in person for 14 months. But, yeah, I would say solid skip on that.
You can do better.
Yeah.
I would rather play it on Tabletop Simulator.
And so now, guys, what do you think? What are the digitized games that you love the most? Did they make our list? Do you have an argument with any of our pros or cons? Is there one we missed that we should absolutely try out because it's a gem we haven't found out about yet? So please let us know below in the comments. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And make sure to catch the next episode where we'll be talking about Board Game Arena, which is awesome. It gives me happiness after going through those last 2 trash games.
I agree. And I'm looking forward to that episode very much.
So, take all that information, do with it what you will, and as always, guys, have a great day and good gaming.
See you next time.
If you like what you just saw, please support us by hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more great gaming content.